Hey everyone, this is George from Evangebros, the podcast you're about to listen to. Just a quick heads up, this one runs a little longer than normal, and it's made especially longer because I'm recording this sweet intro. But all seriousness, it runs a little long, but I honestly think it's one of the best episodes we've ever put out. And therefore, I am going to tell you I think it's worth listening to through the end. So, hope you all enjoy it, and cue the theme song. Hello, and welcome to Evangebros, your weekly podcast about biblical literacy, discipleship, and historical/cultural context. I'm your co-host, George Benson.
I'm your other co-host, Don Sheaver.
And we're back this week again, a little late in the release day, but it still counts as weekly.
Yes, loosely.
Very loosely, but still weekly. Don, how have you been over the last few weeks?
I've been okay, enjoying the weather changing. Feels like once again, straight to summer. But that's okay with me. I love hot weather. Bring me heat, bring me humidity, bring it all. I'm good with it. I'd rather bake in the sun than freeze in the snow.
Oh man, you and I could not be more opposite with that.
That's just the tip of the iceberg.
It is, man. Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that for you.
So you're not a fan. I mean, well, I'm asking this like I don't know it, but I knew as soon as I was saying it that I was going to get the look from you. I did. So not a fan of summer.
I like the concept.
What concept of summer is it that you like?
Well, it's easier to nail down what I don't like.
Okay.
I hate humidity. I like the stickiness of it. It just, man, I do not like, unless there's a pool nearby that I can jump into.
Okay.
I get really hot and I hold heat very well.
Oh, look at you.
I know. So it just, God, I'm getting uncomfortable thinking about this right now.
Wow.
It's just, growing up, that was one of the things I never liked about growing up in this area was just like August and July as a whole.
It is interesting the last couple of years is like my health has put me more in bed more often. And so I've put on some weight over the last couple of years, and not a ton, but about 15 or 20 pounds over the last 2 years. It's my COVID-19 instead of my freshman 10 or my freshman 20, whatever it is. It's my COVID-19. But so I'm kind of curious how this summer will be, because I'm the heaviest I've ever been in my life, and I'm not as active as I used to be. And so I've seen how that has impacted the way that I felt other times. Like during the winter, I didn't get as cold as I used to. So I'm wondering if pretty soon I will become a summer hater as well.
Well, for the last 7 years, I have been the heaviest I've ever been in my life, like incrementally.
Maybe it's gravity and not us.
Man,
Let's just go with that.
I really hope that's the case.
Gravitational pull has changed. Yeah, clearly.
Yes.
Weigh in on that, folks. Let us know. Is it gravity or is it us?
Yeah. I trust
COVID.
I trust this group to use the scientific method. Maybe not all.
I think it depends on which part of the flat Earth you're standing on.
That's true. But we're just hitting all of them right now. I love it.
That's right.
So, okay. So do you want to jump into the topic?
Yes, I love that every week you ask me that exact question, as if like some week I'm going to be like, no, George, nope. Don't want to jump in. I want to dip my toe. I want to just wade in nice and slowly.
I just want to give you the option to say no.
Well, no.
Okay. Well, check us out on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook.
I thought you were just going to ignore me and go anyhow. So,
No, nope. This is going to be another fun week because it will be off the cuff for me. So I'm really anxious to get cracking at this.
oh, good. Good. Well, then I have lots of questions for you.
I have no doubt. I look forward to stuttering my way through it and saying lots of ums.
Excellent. Let's do it.
Okay,
Hey,
so
George, do you want to
yeah,
just jump in?
sure.
All right.
Okay, what are we talking about today, Don?
So, going to talk about Acts chapter 10. Currently at Dusk, we've been talking a lot in the book of Acts and stuff. And so, talked about the Ethiopian eunuch a couple weeks ago, talked about Acts 10 this week, this coming Sunday, which will still be, if you're listening to this when it first comes out, will still be current with that. So the end of May 2020, but is Shavuot. Shavuot starts actually, I think it's either tonight or tomorrow night. And we call that Pentecost, which is Acts 2. So we'll be talking about that this coming weekend. And so anyhow, we just been kind of in the book of Acts. And so I'm gonna pepper you with some questions about Acts chapter 10.
Okie dokie.
So what do you know about Acts 10? So you know it's the story of Peter's vision.
Yes.
So this is where I get to put you on the spot right out the bat. Right off the bat, out the bat?
Let's do out. I like out the bat more.
Okay, out the bat. I'm not the brightest knife in the drawer, so what do you know about Acts 10?
Let's see. So I probably haven't read Acts since the Bible study that I did with you 8 years ago.
Well, we're gonna see how good that stuck. Huh?
Oh man, I think that was the only week I missed, or I didn't take a lot of notes. Son of a gun! I just found my old Acts.
Oh wow, you did.
Notes. Yeah. Oh. Okay. Well, if I remember correctly, like I said, I haven't read it. There was a Roman official that wanted to see Peter. Peter was struggling because he was a Gentile, and wasn't sure what to do about the cleanliness codes.
Okay.
And I think there was something about breaking bread. I remember Peter's vision from it.
So tell me about Peter's vision.
He was asleep and then was brought up on a rooftop, and he saw this blanket laid down over the earth. And it was all different types of animals. And I believe it was a conversation between, I can't remember if it was Peter, or not Peter, but Jesus or God. I mean, technically it's the same person. So saying, who are you to call something unclean that I've made? So therefore, like, everything is clean. And it was about, I think that keeping the, what's it called? Dietary laws. Thank you very much. Yes. That's about all I remember. Oh, and then after Peter wakes up and is like, oh, I can go now. And he starts walking down the road and meets up with Cornelius, I think it was.
Cornelius, yeah.
Nailed it. First try.
So I would say that you remembered one really interesting tidbit that I would say that the way you worded it is not how 99% of people would word it. And I love the way you worded it.
Oh, usually I do not do very well at these at all. So I am genuinely curious about this.
Well, wait for it. But the rest is garbage.
Oh, no, I have no doubt.
So you shared a lot of interpretation.
Oh, sure.
As opposed to what actually happened, except for one that we'll get to, and remind me when we get to it. You won't know. But I'll try to remember, because you did. You gave one note about this that's sincerely. is such a good thing that you grabbed hold of.
Okay, great.
So first of all, Peter does not know about Cornelius before the vision.
Cool.
And so that's one thing. So that was some of your interpretive thing. And listen, we all do that, right? This is actually the entire point of me asking you what it's about, because and for the listener, this is such a great practice. Before you sit down and study a passage, if it's one that you have any level of familiarity, even if it's just minimal, right? It's tangential, it's something you heard in Sunday school when you were little, whatever it might be, it is so valuable to first write it out what you think it is if you're studying by yourself, or speak it out loud. Saying things out loud is really, really helpful, right? And so talk through it, write it out, whatever, what you remember this story to be about. And then what's really important is that then when you actually engage the text, you can see the things that you added that weren't there, the things that you maybe manipulated, maybe things that you left out. It's super powerful and really important to get your presuppositions kind of pinned up on the board early. So that way, when you read the text, it gives you some more freedom to read it with clearer eyes.
Yeah, I got to say, this was one of the most helpful and frustrating parts of discipleship, probably still, because especially early on, I didn't realize how much of what I had retained when you and I first got together was from commentaries and not actually from the text. And it was key into wanting to know more about what it actually is to be biblically literate.
Yep. Well, George, you want to hear my embarrassing story of how it came to light to me that I have the same problem, and that's when I started doing this with every passage?
Oh, please tell me.
All right, so you can hold this against me forever.
I will not hold it against you, but okay.
So I was pastoring, I had been pastoring for a while, and I was talking about the story of the Exodus. And I think it was Exodus. You have to correct me once I tell you where I got my information from.
Okay.
And I later, upon watching a cartoon movie, Prince Out of Egypt, realized that I had some information that I made biblical that was actually from a cartoon.
Oh, I'm well. At least it wasn't Adventures in Odyssey, like it was a
Right.
yeah.
Or Davy and Goliath, or
McGee and me.
Or VeggieTales.
Yeah. Okay.
Just so you know, there are not bunnies, chocolate bunnies in the Bible. I'm just letting you know that right now, all you VeggieTale fans.
There we go.
So I've done the same thing, and honestly, when that happened, and I realized that I preached something as biblical that was actually from a cartoon, I had to look very long in a mirror about what I knew and believed about the text. And in some ways I'm grateful for it. I was embarrassed. No one even called me out. I busted myself, which is also a sad thing that no one either, my guess would be no one noticed, or someone was just too nice to correct me. But
well, you can also be very convincing when you're like actually teaching to someone, and so it's just like I will say there have been times where
I've been wrong and you
no I was going to
me?
say well, I mean, no, maybe, I don't know yet. I'm on the spot. No, it's just one of those things where I think that's also why the work of removing power from the pulpit that we talk about on here is so important too. Absolutely. Because, like, the people can be extremely convincing when it's coming from the pulpit. So whether or not you think something is incorrect, I would assume, at least back in the day, I would be less likely to call someone out, especially in that moment, on whether or not it was accurate, because it's
agreed.
It's coming from up there. But all that to say, yeah.
So let's
Acts 10.
let's actually read uh, about Peter's vision. So let's let's read through verse 23. So we're going to do 9 through 23. Um, do you mind reading that?
No. Okay. This is the NIV, so if you're following along or playing the home game. Okay, Peter's vision. About noon the following day, they were on their journey and approaching the city. Peter went up on a roof to pray. He became hungry and wanted something to eat, and while the meal was being prepared, he fell into a trance. He saw heaven opened and something like a large sheet being let down to earth by its four corners. It contained all kinds of four-footed animals, as well as reptiles and birds. Then a voice told him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." "Surely not, Lord," Peter replied. "I have never eaten anything impure or unclean." The voice spoke to him a second time. "Do not call anything impure that God has made clean." This happened 3 times, and immediately the sheet was taken back to heaven. While Peter was wondering about the meaning of his vision, the men sent by Cornelius found out where Simon's house was and stopped at the gate. They called out asking if Simon, who was known as Peter, was staying there. While Peter was still thinking about the vision, the Spirit said to him, "Simon, 3 men are looking for you. So get up and go downstairs. Do not hesitate to go with them, for I have sent them." Peter went down and said to the men, "I'm the one you're looking for. Why have you come?" The men replied, "We have come from Cornelius the centurion. He is a righteous and God-fearing man who is respected by all the Jewish people. A holy angel told him to ask you to come to his house so that he could hear what you have to say." Then Peter invited the men into the house to be his guests. Boy, I really got that wrong.
So finish reading verse 23. You're not done yet with
Oh,
23.
God, I hate it when they do that. Okay. The next day, Peter started out with them, and some of the believers from Joppa went along.
Okay. So so a couple things. So first of all, let's do this. So what are some things that you noticed in here that you said, "Man, I really got that wrong"? So what are just a few things that you noticed? We don't need to reinterpret or anything like that, but just was there any big things that you noticed?
The first thing, like, while reading it, I recognized, okay, boy, I really had my markers wrong. But the only thing I would say that really jumped out to me from the text was verse 15 and 16. The voice spoke to him a second time. "Do not call anything impure that God has made clean." This happened 3 times, and immediately the sheet went back up to heaven. It's Peter 3 times, the crow, the denial. Um,
Oh
so
yeah, yeah. Peter is good at effing up 3 times, right? And
yeah,
if you notice, it still doesn't say that he ate anything.
yeah.
It doesn't say finally after the third time
No, the
he took
sheet
and ate.
went up.
Yep, it's like God was like, all right, fine. Not gonna get it through your head.
Yeah.
So where is, and you can use the beginning part of chapter 10 to kind of suss some of this out. So where is Peter staying?
Caesarea Philippi.
Uh,
No, no, no,
nope.
nope. I really screwed that up. I just said the first village that I saw in the text. Uh, okay.
Well, you read in the very last verse what city he's
Oh,
in.
Joppa.
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 It might be Joppa. I don't know.
Eh.
But I always think of Penn State when I say Joppa.
Ooh,
So,
yeah. Okay.
um, so and where was he staying in Joppa?
At someone's house. Hold on. Oh,
Verse 6.
yeah. Okay. Simon the Tanner. That's got a smell.
Yeah. And where's his house?
By the sea.
Okay. So let's begin there. Because this is one of the things that I think we're not good at, and that is attentive reading. Right.
Okay.
So there's a few hints that's given to us immediately. And you kind of made a sound about uh, Simon the Tanner. So why did you react that way about Simon the Tanner?
Uh, Usually urine is used in tanning leather.
Mhm. Yeah, and so What would that have made them?
Unclean.
Yeah, unclean, impure,
Impure.
more
Okay.
so, right? Impure would
Impure.
have been more so.
Thank you for the
They
correction.
themselves would not have been unclean, right? Um, and so they would have been impure. So before they could go into the temple, they would have had to do what?
Wash.
Yeah, go through a mikvah, right? So a self baptism, basically, in order to get ritual purity and be able to go in. Now, the city. Why do we know this city?
That is a great question.
I
And
know.
we are taking phone calls right now in case anybody wants to. No, I can't. I have no recollection currently.
So there is a story in the text. It's a pretty famous story about someone in Joppa.
Okay.
Any guesses?
Um, Abraham.
It's a great guess. It's very wrong.
Well, that's how I roll. I cannot remember. I have no idea.
But he rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a big ship going to Tarshish. Who is he?
Jonah.
Yeah, right. So Jonah, the story of Jonah, when God comes to him and tells him to do what?
Go to Nineveh to tell the Ninevites about Yahweh and the forgiveness that he would offer. Not he, the forgiveness that Yahweh would offer.
Close. To go to Nineveh and tell them to repent.
That's it. Repent.
So, so here we have a story of Jonah going to the Gentiles to hopefully bring what? How would you say that? How would you phrase that? Evangelical. Think evangelical. Go to the lost and bring what?
Salvation.
There you go. Right. So here Jonah is told to go to the Gentiles, tell them to repent so that they could receive salvation and be rescued from God's wrath. Right. And so now we are where in Acts 10.
We are in Joppa, which I assume is within the Roman Empire.
Well, but still, what's this story about? What's God going to ask Peter to do?
To go to meet up with Cornelius
So
so that
just
he can
repeat,
so that Cornelius can hear what Peter has to say about the way.
or more simply, Peter
To
will go to the Gentiles.
evangelize.
Peter will go to the Gentiles and offer salvation.
I mean, 6 to 1, half dozen to the other.
Yes. So now, so we have this picture, and I really think it's important for us to recognize this connection, right? That that the author of Acts or divine interaction, whatever it might be, we find uh, Peter in Joppa and being called or told to go to the Gentiles, be willing to go to the Gentiles. Right. So now, if you're familiar with the Hebrew text and you're a listener, what are you kind of on edge to see what happens?
If he's going to go or not.
Why? Why is that what you're on edge about?
Um, because Jonah didn't initially.
Yeah, because
I mean,
Jonah goes the other direction.
yeah, with Peter being by the sea. I mean, it would make sense if he were trying to run away, he'd hop in a boat.
Right, and head towards Tarshish. Right, like part of me wonders if like any of the listeners would have been like, okay, is he going to Cornelius's house or is he going to Tarshish? What's happening? What's going to happen in this moment? Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell me more about the vision now that you've read it.
Okay. Um,
So start with the first thing. What's lowered?
a sheet.
Okay. And how is it lowered?
Um, by its four corners.
Why tell us four corners? Why not just say a sheet was lowered? Like, why do we need to know it was lowered by its corners?
Um, I want to say it's connected to the four-footed animals, but I have no idea.
Yeah, they actually were parachuted in, one corner tied to each one of the foot of the four-footed, and they were just dropped,
You just
airdropped. It was like Dumbo drop. What was that movie?
Operation Dumbo Drop, starring Ray
Operation.
Liotta and Danny Glover.
Oh, sure. Now you have facts.
Oh yeah, yeah. If you're asking me about Disney Channel original films from the '90s, I got facts.
So, okay, so the four corners. Now, I do want to point out that I had someone present a really interesting thought on this that I had never considered and I want to look more into. But they associated the four corners with the four corners of a garment that the tzitzit are on that are about Torah. I had never considered that.
Wow.
And so I just want to throw that out. Dan Osborne, you're the man. That was an amazing connection I had not considered. So,
Great job, Dan.
so I'm not going to speak to that because I have yet to study it out, but it's a really intriguing idea. But four corners, and where is it lowered?
Um, to the earth.
Now that's the part you got right that I thought was interesting in your telling of it. Because I think most people perceive that this was more like a picnic blanket lowered down on top of the roof that Peter was sitting on, right? That's how most people, when I've asked them to explain it over the years, has kind of viewed it, is that this blanket is lowered down, almost presenting it just to Peter, right?
Got it.
But where are they supposed to take the gospel?
To the four corners of the earth.
There you go. So there's your four corners, right?
Okay.
And so it's lowered by the four corners to the earth. So when you said to cover the earth, because I think that was your exact phrase, I might be wrong, but you said it lowered across the earth or over the earth. You said something like that to imply that it fully covered the earth, our flat earth, right?
Yes, our very flat earth.
That's how it has four corners. It's not even round. So when it's lowered down, Peter sees what?
The earth getting covered.
Okay, but what does he see on the sheet?
All kinds of four-footed animals, reptiles, and birds.
Okay, and how are they described?
As clean?
Nope. That word is never used.
That's true. That's not true. The second voice said, "Don't call anything impure that God has made clean."
Okay, but I mean when it says it's lowered down, what does it say?
Got it. Sorry. I'm jumping the gun here. Or the shark, jumping the shark.
Okay, Fonzarelli. Older than 20 years. Got it.
Yeah, way to go. I could you rephrase the question? I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
Well, you were on the right path by saying clean.
Okay. Oh. Impure?
In verse 14.
Surely not, Lord. I've never eaten anything impure or unclean. Okay, got it.
So there's animals on this. Now, the word impure, we just said it about being at a tanner's house, right? You would have been impure.
Yes.
And so how does impurity happen?
By not following Torah?
Loosely, yeah. But so this whole thing with the urine and the tanner, how would you become impure in that setting?
By
pissing on your hands.
Yeah. There we go.
Like
okay,
coming in contact with urine would make you impure.
Yeah.
Right. And so if these animals are impure and unclean, what can we suss out is the makeup of the animals?
That they come into contact with their piss.
No.
No.
I mean, maybe,
I
but
mean, uh, I mean, I would say that they're not in, or they're described as not being able to be consumed in the dietary laws. But
why?
uh, what do you mean?
I mean, why would that be your assessment?
Because the little that I remember, if if they're not if they're not within the dietary laws, you should not eat them. I mean, I'm shooting
Okay,
from the yeah.
that's fine. So you mentioned in your original paraphrase that God declares all food clean, kind of thing.
Sure.
It's what you said, right?
Yeah.
And almost does away with the dietary laws in this story
Well, I would say
by
he
declaring the food clean.
to Peter probably, yeah. I
So
don't
a
know if
lot of
that
people have used this to say that therefore everything's clean. God made everything clean. So like a lot of people will reduce the entirety of Acts chapter 10 to just being about we no longer have to worry about eating bacon cheeseburgers.
yes.
There's another famous passage in the Gospels where people like to do the same thing. Do you know what it is?
Uh I assume it's something with Paul and eating meat that was on altars. No?
Nope, but that's a good guess. I'll give you that one.
Oh, thank you.
So in Mark 7, the Pharisees approached Jesus and his disciples in the marketplace, and they got their knickers in a twist about something. What is it?
Um that they were eating with unwashed hands.
Yes. And what were they worried was going to happen since their hands were not washed?
That they would be impure.
And therefore do what to the food they're eating?
Make it impure.
And what is Jesus's response to that?
Whatever is impure comes from within, not what you ingest.
Sure, that's kind of his conclusion to this, but what is his response to that particular notion?
Um, let's see. He quotes Isaiah: "The people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings were merely human rules."
So his this is he quotes something. It's paraphrased.
Okay.
It's parenthetical rather in verse 19.
Oh.
The parentheses in verse 19.
Ah. In saying this, Jesus declared all foods clean.
So wow, such interpretive license right there.
It's probably some of the best.
So Jesus, in this instance, I'm going to give you a quick breakdown of this passage. The Pharisees approach him, say, "How dare your disciples not wash their hands before they eat? In so doing, they have made the food impure that they're eating." Jesus's response to this is, don't man-made laws never override God's commands. So what is a man-made law in this?
Oral tradition.
Right, but what specific law?
I don't know.
You must wash your hands before you eat.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And so you must wash your hands before you eat, because if you don't, you'll do what?
Make something impure.
And Jesus is saying, no, God made that clean. Your man-made rules can't override what God has done. So therefore, whether you wash your hands or not does not change whether or not your lamb chops are clean. Right? And so this great parenthetical where it says, "Thus he declared all foods clean." We may have talked about this on the podcast before, but if not, I often say if someone comes to my house and house sits for me, say you, George, you came over to house sit, and because we have a dog and stuff, and Tana and I go away, and I said, George, you may eat any of the food in the house. Have at it. What would I not expect to be missing when I got home?
Your dog.
Yeah, because why?
Because I would not eat your dog in
Because
a
because she's not food,
yeah.
right? And so when Jesus declares all food clean, he's not declaring things that the Jewish people did not view as food as now edible. So this is not Jesus declaring now that you can have pig.
So it would
This is
be
Jesus saying that lambs are clean, regardless of whether you wash your hands,
yeah.
regardless of whatever.
So Peter being in Simon the Tanner's house, by entering it and coming into contact with stuff that piss was on, he would have rendered himself impure. So then
Mm-hmm.
the idea of him in this vision, getting up, killing something, and eating it, he is making whatever it is that he is about to eat impure because he hasn't gone through his ritual washing, or he hasn't washed his hands.
So you're pretty close.
Okay.
You're definitely on the right track. Now, Peter would have been one of the disciples in that, so he would have heard the teaching of Jesus that says washing your hands doesn't impact the food you eat.
Yeah, but he also heard that he'd deny him.
I agree. So, but there was a tradition that if if I had a lamb and the lamb became, just think of like Fox and the Hound, right? Go old school Disney again, right?
Yeah.
And unlikely friends. So the unlikely friend of this lamb is a pig, and they become buddies. They hang out all the time. One of them dies at the end of the story. It's really sad, but we don't need to talk about that.
Okay.
So Israel, many people within Israel, including Peter in this moment, would have called the lamb impure because of its contact with an unclean animal.
Got it. But if we're rolling with the teaching that Jesus gives in Mark 7, it doesn't matter if it came into the contact with the pig, the lamb would have been clean irregardless.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So this is really significant because what we often miss in this is that it says that when the sheet was lowered down, there were impure animals and there were unclean animals. Not one type of animal, but they're impure and unclean. So when God says, take and eat, Peter's response isn't, I've never eaten an unclean animal. What is his response?
I have never eaten anything impure or unclean.
Right, because he's differentiating between the two. He's recognizing that there are clean animals and there are unclean animals, and that because they all were mingled together on this sheet that covered the earth, that in some way it had become tainted. And so he's telling God, I've never eaten anything unclean and I've never eaten anything impure. Why is this important?
I assume there's imagery there for going to the Gentiles and speaking to them about what what Peter has to say about Jesus.
Yeah,
Yeah.
particularly going into the person's home,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Which over time in Israel became something that most Israelites would not do. They would not go into a Gentile home, not out of, now, I want to be careful here. Was there prejudice? Was there stuff like that, bigotry and stuff? Probably amongst the Israelites, thinking that the Gentiles were below them. But that's not where that came from. Where that came from was about ritual purity and came from wanting to honor God.
Yeah.
We can do lots of screwed up things in from the lens of trying to honor God that is very oppressive and terrible and horrible. Just we don't even need to make very many guesses to get there, right?
Absolutely.
So So by this time in Israel's story, most Jews would not enter the house of a Gentile because of the potential for becoming ritually impure, uh, or mingling, so to speak, with the Gentiles.
Sure.
So now this picture is God lowering this sheet, and it covers the entire earth. And what do you imagine that's forecasting?
Uh, the Great Commission comes to mind, going and making disciples of all nations.
Right, to the four corners of the earth. Like,
Yeah.
this is what it's supposed to look like. This is what it's supposed to be. And you can do it without fear. Because when you go and you bring this salvation, when you go and you bring this, because here's the thing. Does God hate pigs?
No, I would say probably not.
Right. No, like they're animals, they're creatures. God made them, God created them, right? That this we've confused in Christianity, like impure and unclean as being negative. And it's not, and I would argue was happening within Israel at some level too, right? That it became a stigma instead of just a status, right? Like, I sneeze into my hand. I know you should do it into the crook of your arm, but for just conversation, I sneeze into my hand. My hand is not now bad, but I should wash it, right?
Yeah.
But it hasn't ruined my hand. And so this whole picture is that these things aren't bad. The Gentiles aren't bad. They aren't inherently wicked. They aren't inherently evil. They're not terrible. They're not the antithesis of Israel. They're not the enemy. They're just different. They represent a different part or portion of God's idea of the fullness of creation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
So now we're left with this picture of the sheep being lowered, of him having this experience, and now all of a sudden at the end of it, God pulls it up and says, "What?"
Oh, sorry, I was not even still thinking about what you said. Do not call anything impure that God has made clean.
Right. So verse 17 then.
But while Peter was wondering about the meaning of this vision, 3 men sent by Cornelius found out where Simon's house was and stopped in at the gate. You want me to keep going?
Yep.
Okay. They called out asking if Simon, who was known as Peter, was staying there. While Peter was still thinking about the vision, the Spirit said to him, "Simon, 3 men are looking for you. So get up and go downstairs. Do not hesitate to go with them, for I have sent them." Peter
Yep.
went.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Keep going.
Peter went down and said to the men, "I'm the one you're looking for. Why have you come?" The men replied, "We have come from Cornelius the centurion. He is a righteous and God-fearing man who is respected by all the Jewish people. A holy angel has told him to ask you to come to his house so that he could hear what you have to say." Then Peter invited the men into the house to be his guests.
Yes. So like Peter gets it now. Like he's like, I don't understand this. What was this all about? And then 3 Gentiles show up.
Yeah.
And he goes down and he invites them into his home. So a quick aside, how is Cornelius described? Verse 22 is more so what I'm thinking of, not his job, but his character seems to be described.
Righteous and God-fearing.
Yeah. So what is God-fearing?
Are you asking what it means today, or what I think it means, or what it meant in first century?
What it meant then?
I have no clue. Cannot remember.
So this is where Paul's letters get really, really complicated.
Oh, this is where they get complicated?
Yeah, and you'll understand why in a second, right?
Okay.
So you have so I'm going to give you the different types of people that Paul is usually addressing within one church.
Okay.
Now, we've done really good in our churches to get rid of anyone that disagrees with us,
Well, I mean, you
right?
can't have, you know, dissenting voices.
Like, how many churches have you walked into that are and a relatively even mix of political views, or an even mix of theological views, or like
The
we
majority.
just don't
Yeah.
we just don't do that, right?
Correct.
Like we separate. That's a liberal church, that's a conservative or fundamentalist church, that's a whatever, whatever theological divides we can find. We tend to just split the church.
Yeah.
But in the churches that Paul was writing to, he had Jews who became convinced that Jesus was Messiah. And I want to be very careful. I do not like calling them converts to Christianity, because Jesus is the Jewish Messiah, not a new religion. So
Agreed.
you have Jews that were convinced Jesus was Messiah. You have uh, Gentiles who become convinced Jesus is the Jewish Messiah. Okay, and those would be proselytes or converts. You have Christians who converted to Judaism, or I'm sorry, Gentiles who converted to Judaism that now believe Jesus is the Jewish Messiah. So the difference between a Gentile believing Jesus is the Messiah without becoming Jewish first is they probably weren't circumcised and don't necessarily follow the 613 laws. The Gentiles that became Jewish first have been circumcised, follow the 613 laws, and now believe Jesus is Messiah. There's some conflict between those two, believe me,
I would
because they're like, wait, you're telling me I still have to observe the 613 laws, but these schmucks that just came in, you're telling me, according to Acts 15, that they only have to follow 6 out of the 613? What about the other 607, right?
yeah.
Then you have God-fearers. God-fearers maintained their gods, but also accepted and believed in Yahweh.
Hmm.
But they had not abandoned their other gods. And so a God-fearer was like, they believed that the Jewish God was indeed God, and they were welcomed in the synagogue. And this is so important because we have such bad views of Judaism, and it's just not fair or true. It would be marked on Twitter with a check your sources thing. That the Jews had God-fearers constantly. In fact, there's all throughout Israel, you can find synagogues that had a list of the God-fearers that helped build the synagogue. And they were welcomed in the synagogues, and they weren't expected to convert in order to participate. And so Cornelius is a God-fearer, which means he's maintained his Roman gods, but he also recognizes Yahweh to be God. This is also important with the vision, right? And this disrupts a lot of our view, because what shows up to Cornelius?
An angel.
Yeah. So God isn't prohibited in some way from showing up to a God-fearer. It doesn't say, well, we have to wait till Cornelius drops his other gods before God's going to interact. But instead, God shows up and it speaks to him. This all goes against a lot of our evangelical thinking, right? So what do you think so far? Like, thoughts, feedback? I mean, this
I
is a lot.
No, it is a lot. I mean, um, this is we're talking about stuff I haven't tapped into or read about in years. So it's just like it's like opening up the floodgates, pretty much. Synapses are firing that haven't in in a while. So I'm just thinking about all of this, and you know where I used to be at, and just the idea that we in my experience, especially in the evangelical church, uh, we like to say that God is still moving today, um, but we don't actually act like it.
Yep.
So, like, you're talking about the God-fearers being in um, a lot in the synagogues, and how, I would say evangelicals and I know would be like, oh yeah, let's bring these people in. After all are welcome, but not actually mean it. Like, there's
Yep.
the giant asterisk next to the all are welcome. It's the you are welcome if you are willing. No, you're welcome to come, but if you want to stay, it's expected that you change in the way that we think you need to change.
Agreed. Yep. So, what time of day does this take place?
I don't know. Hold on, let me consult the text.
Verse 9.
Verse 9. About noon.
So, what just happens a couple chapters earlier at noon?
Uh, the giving of tongues.
No.
There's got to be a better way to say that one.
The time that God tongued 3,000 people?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, no, it's Cornelius. Not Cornelius, I'm sorry, the Ethiopian eunuch.
Oh,
And Philip goes to him at noon and again doesn't fit the criteria. He's a eunuch. He's an immigrant.
yeah,
He's talk about anti-evangelical. He is a eunuch, which makes him a sexual minority, therefore part of the queer community. He's a person of color. He's an immigrant. He has a disability. All of these things, and
yeah.
yet still, it says, "There's water. Give me a reason I shouldn't be baptized now." Philip doesn't even begin to come up with anything. Instead, Philip stops the chariot and instantly baptizes him. Wouldn't that be great if we still believed that way?
Wouldn't it be great if we acted that way? Because, like, believing it isn't enough.
Wouldn't it be great if we actually knew the Bible?
I mean,
So who else do we know that is famous within the Gospels for a noon encounter?
Paul.
So I was thinking that, and in Acts, it doesn't say noon, but Paul talks about his experience on the road to Damascus at another point, and I do think it mentions at noon because I think it says it was noon, the brightest part of the day, and the light that came was even brighter. So I do think you're correct. I don't think Acts actually mentions noon, but I
Okay.
could be wrong about that. That's actually I think the previous chapter. But I do believe that that's correct. But that could be that I saw that in a cartoon
Oh, yeah,
and
I'm sure.
I'm misremembering it.
Yeah.
But the woman at the well,
Oh, that's right.
the Samaritan woman, it's noon.
Yeah.
And so there seems to be lots of these noon encounters with unexpected or unlikely individuals experiencing the favor of God when it seems counter to the way that they would normally be treated or engaged by God. It's really interesting. And Paul, if we do want to say Paul was at noon, and someone can do that, look that up for us because I'm lazy. Paul is blind for 3 days, and we have Peter 3 times here. So the 3 is repeated. And what is the sign of Jonah?
Uh, 3 days in the
Yep.
whale. Yeah.
3 days in the belly of the whale, right? Jesus, 3 days in the grave. So all of these threes are happening as well. So we're left then. So let me read something from. This is why, George, you've heard me talk about this before. This is the danger, in my opinion, of our sloppy and simple reading of the text, right? Because think about all the stuff we just pulled out of this, and I'm trying to make it as brief as possible to fit on a podcast. We
Oh,
could
yeah.
go for hours, and and that's what I want to encourage people with. Like, the text is so deep. There's so many inferences and references and allusions to other places in the text that should make our bones burst with excitement. So, verse 2 of Jonah.
What is it? Chapter 1?
1.
Okay.
Yep. So let's start with verse 1. Read verse 1, 2, and 3.
Okay. We're going to pulling it up. 1 second. 2 seconds.
Pulling it up means digital.
Yep. Okay. You said 1, 2, and what? 3?
Yeah, just 1 through 3.
Okay. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Hope that's correct. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come before me. But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. He went up to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord.
Right. So how does your verse 2 begin? Like, what's the very first word or two?
Go to.
Okay, so it's arise.
Oh.
The word is actually arise. Get up. Arise, go to. Right?
Yeah.
Now, when God appears to Peter and says, and does the imagery, or that drops the sheet and stuff, in verse 20 of chapter 10, what does God say to Peter?
God says to Peter, so get up and go downstairs.
Arise. And go. And so again, we have this callback, this like arise and go. Now, Jonah flees from Joppa. Peter is given. So I love when we get to chapter 3 in Jonah. God says it again in verse 2. He's now been vomited up on the beach. And God says to him, arise, go to Nineveh. Right? And here we are at the end of this section with Peter. And it says, the next day he rose and went away with them. And so we have Peter is now doing what Jonah should have done in the first place. So I guess what I want to do now, like, I don't want to wrap this in a nice, neat bow because there's so much to it, and I would not do it any justice to try and give to wrap this up because there's just so much to it. But what would you say, George, is kind of your takeaway from this? And I'm asking you for how you think that this is applicable today for us. Like, what does this mean to us today? How should we read this in today's world?
Well, the very first thing that comes to mind is to do the hard work worth doing.
Okay.
So, oh man. Okay, there's a lot happening in my mind that I'm going to try and figure out how to make a cohesive sentence out of.
That's fine.
There's a podcast that Jet and I are listening to right now called The Missionary, and it's
wait.
It's about the a woman who at 19 went over to Uganda and set up a baby home. And this is in the news end of last year, how there were a number of children that passed in her care. And so it's this journal that these journalists.
I do remember this story.
Yeah. I think we even talked about it. It may not have been I can't remember. Anyway, but so these journalists go to Uganda and do some of the research on it and trying to figure out what actually happened. And there's an organization called No White Saviors, No More White Saviors, something like that. The note will be in the footnote. Anyway, and part of it is examining how missionaries have worked in the past. The colonialism of that and everything. So I've been thinking a lot about that. And I was reading this morning, I can't remember if it was on social media or an actual quote in a news thing, how Christians are so quick to go help people of color that aren't in their country.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a lot of attempted or violent acts against people of color that have continued to come to light because people have cameras, stuff that's been going on forever,
Right.
And so like, I've been thinking about all this, especially this morning. And here is Peter arising and going to speak with Cornelius. But the difference is Cornelius wants to hear what he has to say. There's consent that's involved in this.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So not in the colonializing missionary sense.
Correct.
Right? Okay, I see what you're saying. Got it.
So there's, the idea of the Great Commission, and we talk about this quite often. Discipleship is a process that takes years and years and years, and you never fully arrive somewhere. But the idea is, you're able to move on and teach others what you have learned, but there's always some type of consent involved in that. It was a long process for me to be able to start to learn from you in that way. And just how evangelicalism has approached this idea of, throwing up blankets and saying, this is all clean. We have permission to do this now. I don't know. That's what's going through my mind with all of this.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's application in that, but
yeah, for me, I love the book of Acts for oftentimes many different reasons than other people probably do.
Mm-hmm.
Because the first several interactions with either conversions and I use the term conversion very lightly in this because I don't, again, view Paul as a convert, but who is welcome to participate in the renewed covenant under Jesus as Messiah keeps breaking down barriers, breaking down these walls, right? Language used in the text, these barriers that keep people. And it begins with the Ethiopian who doesn't fit any of the mold and is baptized instantly, right? Person of color, sexual minority, disability, and immigrant. And then you have Saul, who persecuted people who believed in Jesus as Messiah, and he is welcomed. And now you have Cornelius, impure, God-fearer, not convert, who is welcome. And this whole thing is telling us the kingdom is way bigger than you ever imagined. And those who are welcome to participate in the kingdom is so much bigger and so much broader than anything you imagined. And Jonah should have seen it. Because for the people of Nineveh to repent, it means they had to have had a place in the kingdom. Even before Jesus, God was concerned about Nineveh. They weren't Jews. Nineveh wasn't Jewish. Nineveh was Gentile. Repent for what? They weren't Jewish. But yet God seemed to imagine that they had a place in the kingdom. this is so significant for us that, man, I just wish that we as Christians would embrace this picture that the kingdom is bigger, more vast, and more diverse than anything we ever imagined, and it's worth celebrating, not being afraid to take and eat.
Yeah. So you were talking about all that, and I'm just like, my mind's firing on a couple of different cylinders. And I know we need to wrap up soon, but like Isaiah 56 came to mind, which is the passage where verse 3, let no foreigner who is bound to the Lord say, the Lord will surely exclude me from his people. And let no eunuch complain, I am only a dry tree, for this is what the Lord says. To the eunuchs who keep my Sabbath, who choose what pleases me, to hold fast to my covenant, to them I will give within my temple and its walls a memorial and a name better than the sons and daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that will endure forever. And it just goes on. And it's just like, man, this stuff has been in the text from the beginning, and I just wish we acted like we believed it sometimes.
And I wish we would recognize that it's been there within Judaism, and it's not a Christian concept.
Absolutely.
It is a God concept.
I think that's the best note to end on. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Evangebros. If you really like this podcast, go over to iTunes and give us a 5-star review. Due to algorithms, hey, you know what? Rate us whatever you think. Algorithms really like 5 stars, but I'm not going to tell you what to do. We're also over on Patreon at Evangebros. And if you have any questions, want to talk more about this, if you have any suggestions, or hey, we disagree with you because of this reason, shoot us an email, evangebros@gmail.com. I have been your co-host, George.
I've been your other co-host, Don.
Have a great week, everyone.
See ya.